Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Graham Moates. I'm from the Crown Estate. I'm in the New Ventures team, and one area that we're focusing on the Crown Estate is supporting the fast development of floating offshore wind, particularly in the southwest and the Celtic Sea. We put this presentation together to show how all our organisations are actually talking with each other to see how we are approaching data acquisition in a strategic fashion to represent best value for UK. And with that, that's about strategic characterisation and forming some kind of baseline study for our work in the Celtic Sea. Some of you may have seen this graphic from the Crown Estate. This shows the work by the spatial teams as to the areas of search currently, and within these areas of search there will be 4 areas announced for future wind farm projects which developers will bid on, and my role at the Crown Estate is to look at how we can support those developers by acquiring marine data sets. We're calling those data sets pre-consent surveys. We've done a number of consultations with developers and statutory bodies to understand how those data sets could best be designed. For those of you who aren't familiar with offshore wind, or floating offshore wind rather, here's a typical structure. The time that we're looking on for design is the floating structures will be in the order of 300 metres high. So that's about the height of the shard. When I say height, that's not the tower section, that's to the upper tip of the rotating blade. For us to design our survey specifications, I think it's been really important that we reach out and we have the right people in the team. That's not assuming then that at the Crown Estate we have all the answers. So we have commissioned the work for technical advisors, and these are some of the people on the screen here. You can see so ABP Mayor, Doris, Turner Townsend and Ortec. As well as speaking to technical advisors, it's then about reaching out to other agencies and other bodies to ensure that our specifications are fit for purpose when the developers come to use our data sets as part of their consenting process. There's a heap of information there on the screen. I'm not going to read it out. I'm sure you've read it already. And some of the people that we're talking to there to ensure that our data sets are fit for purpose and useful to developers. Where's the data going to end up? Something called the Marine Data Exchange. I expect many of you have heard of this. We do put in our leasing agreements and license agreements via the MMO that all marine data sets need to be shared with us. That way we secure data history for the benefit of the UK, and that's on the Marine Data Exchange for you to access. If you're not familiar with it, jump on the Crown Estate website. There's volumes and volumes of reports and survey and data sets, all freely available for you to access and use. The data sets that we're looking at specifically for pre-consent surveys, we'll start with wind and wave. Wind is a really important data set for the developers to have. It's a long lead item, it's a 2-year data set, and for them they need to understand the wind potential in the wind farm site. So that's about modelling early and also useful to understand orientation of the site, layout design, such that they can best design the wind site. We've awarded these works to Partrack already, and we'll be putting Flydar wave buoys out later this year. Another important data set, a long lead data set, is bird and marine mammal surveys. We're doing this in collaboration with a number of other organisations, and I know Neil's going to show something in a moment from Celtic Sea Power and where they've done their bird and marine mammal surveys, so we're looking very closely to collaborate with them. Our surveys will be focusing in on the project development areas, as well as looking at a regional data set to overlap with the work the Celtic Sea Power are doing, so we can create a baseline model for the Celtic Sea as a region. There's some of the considerations given to marine mammals and birds. We've got some smaller species there, which are going to prove quite challenging to gather from just aircraft work, so we'll also do some boat-based work, and there's a listing of some of the marine species that we're looking at based on the marine mammals side. Basking sharks came up early. We've already commissioned a basking shark desktop study for the Celtic Sea, and that with all of the results in this data set will be freely available in the future. Geophysics is really important to the developers to understand the seabed environment that they wish to attach these offshore wind structures to. So that's about anchoring design, scour and sedimentation interruption. It's also about understanding cabling design and how much electricity can put down cables that are ploughed or laid on the seabed. So that's about how the soils bake the cables or cool the cables as electricity is moved down them. Floating offshore wind, in fact, within the site area, not such an important consideration because it's likely the cables will be suspended in the water column. Geotechnics, this just backs up the geophysics data, so some hard data to understand soil properties, stiffness for anchoring types, or piling if the project development areas are in an area of rock. Let's just quickly run through this. So there we have it, 4 data streams, and starting with the end in mind, as I've said, this is about enabling developers to fast track and design their consenting programs and de-risk early design. With that, I'm going to hand over to Neil.
So you've got a couple of us swapping shifts as we go through, so I'll just introduce myself quickly. My name's Neil Farrington, so I'm the Strategic Offshore Development Manager with Celtic Sea Power, and my colleague Harrison Smith is going to jump in a minute as well to present a couple of slides to you. Just quick background, we're effectively an organisation owned by Cornwall Council. We are autonomous, but we are linked to the council, and obviously have common objectives in terms of climate change targets, renewable energy reduction. There's now 18 of us, so we've only been around a couple of years, but the team's fairly extensive. Half of us are based down in the office in Hale in Cornwall, and the rest of the team is over in Pembroke, which allows us to get great coverage for the Celtic Sea, useful to have people on both sides. And really for the last couple of years we've been running 2 big ERDF funded projects, so we've had about £10 million to actually put into floating wind sector development. So we're not floating wind developers strictly, but we're really trying to secure the benefits of the sector for the region. So some of that has involved environmental consenting, which I'll move on to next. And really the big aim for us, as I said, we're not a floating wind developer, we're not looking at a tight project development site and focusing all our data efforts there. What we're much more interested in is the longer term picture for the whole of the Celtic Sea region. So the stuff Graham's just described is really focused on the 4 gigawatt leasing round this year, but there's bigger ambitions for sort of 20 gigawatts of capacity. Better we understand the environment, better the schemes can be designed, and better environmental factors can be inputted into engineering decisions, for example. And as you've probably picked out today, and I think you're all fully aware, as soon as you step away from the coastline, there's a big void of data for the Celtic Sea, particularly between Cornwall, Devon and Wales. Most of our development is about 45 kilometres offshore, so we're not getting any luck with shoreside readings, not a lot with boat-based surveys, and we're now trying to fill that gap in between. And critical to that, we work closely with some of the consenting bodies to really ensure we have a single sound evidence base. Anyone involved in licensing will understand quite clearly there can be a lot of to and fro trying to agree what evidence we're actually assessing before we even get into the impact piece. So if we can get that agreement up front and we're all looking at the same evidence, it should smooth the decision process through. So very interested in trying to streamline that consenting process and enable us to meet the climate change targets we have. Our focus again is on regional characterisation models. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. As I mentioned, we're trying to get as much coverage as a region as we can within budget, but we're also keen to ensure that these models are sound and they have high levels of confidence. So something we're doing slightly different to the other partners, we actually have a number of data sharing agreements going through with commercial floating wind developers. So there's potentially packages of what would have formerly been commercially sensitive data that we will be able to access. We can't publish them because they're sensitive, but one way we can get them out to the public is through integration into regional models. So it gives us a way to transform the data, drop the sensitivity, and make sure we can make it available. The other benefit of that obviously is we increase the data sources. So a lot you'll see, particularly with wind resource, for example, has been based on modelling. There's only a couple of floating LiDAR platforms that have been out that have given us an actual measured data set. The data sharing agreements allows us to bulk that number up. So potentially we're looking at 9 or 10 floating LiDAR data sets going into the regional wind resource model in the next 3 to 4 years. It also ensures we capture data from developers that aren't successful in a leasing round. So people that are going out collecting speculative data, we're also looking to make sure we secure that. Just practically, that potentially gives us digital aerial survey data, for example, over the last 3 years for the Celtic Sea area, and that's all through the data sharing agreement progress. Just jumping on to a couple of the campaigns. So I mentioned we had 2 floating LiDAR platforms that went out in June last year. They are collecting wind resource data, but they're also picking up wave data and current data, and also have weather stations, so we're getting atmospheric pressures and other readings through. Now again, we're looking to build all that data into a regional wind resource model. And in terms of the confidence side, we've actually brought in the Wood Group that are heavily involved in investment decisions for wind development. So again, just making sure everything we publish has the highest level of confidence as possible. We're also about to develop the wind resource model further this year. That includes input from those other data sets I mentioned from commercial developments. But we're also doing a big piece of correlation work to look at existing data sets, such as the Aero 5 satellite data, look at comparing that to measured data sets from the floating LiDAR, and look at the correlations. We're also correlating it against 2 other mesoscale wind resource models for the region. And what we're really trying to pin down here is, do we need to keep putting kit out the sea? Do we need to repeatedly do it with independent developers that aren't sharing information, which leads to time delay, replication, carbon impacts in terms of emissions? So really trying to focus that down. We will have a lot of results next year. So I should have mentioned that at the beginning. It's been really nice to see all your progress from last year's data. We'd love to come back next year and actually give you the output of these surveys. We're just right in the middle of everything at the moment. I won't go into the positions in any depth, but effectively the LiDARs have been placed to maximise confidence in the measurements. So we're trying to increase spatial coverage and temporal coverage, and obviously be as efficient as we can with budgets. Harrison's now going to jump in on a couple of other survey areas.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I'm Harrison Smith, the Environmental Impact Assessment Officer at Celtic Sea Power. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to quickly run through the remainder of the campaigns that we are working on and working towards. So as you can see, eDNA, so environmental DNA is a relatively new field within science, and we're trying to utilise that at each one of the servicing campaigns of our floating LiDAR. So we're taking samples at both LiDAR at the surface level and about 80 metres below surface level. And what's really important about that is it gives us a 24-hour sort of snapshot of what we think's been in the area, mostly marine mammals and fish, in around 300 metres squared. And the good thing about this is, hopefully, as the evidence base for eDNA generally builds, and how this maybe can correlate with our future campaigns, it kind of builds up that evidence base to suggest that eDNA, as a very non-invasive alternative, it could be used for just general regional characterisation in the future. Next, so our digital aerial surveys. So as with fixed wind, the same impacts can occur with floating offshore wind for birds, but before we interpret that, we really want to understand a really good baseline of exactly what actually is out there. So we worked with 4 consenting bodies to come up with the kind of specification that we can give a regional characterisation of digital aerial surveys. And as you can see, this is actually a 5% coverage. So what's neat about this is when we refine the survey areas in the future with the Crown Estate, and hopefully the Crown Estate can then do further digital aerial surveys that infill those lines, and then with those specified areas you effectively have the industry standard of 10% survey coverage. One of the things about digital aerial surveys is obviously you can't get flight height data for birds. So similar to the eDNA, we're utilising a relatively new technology of aerial LiDAR, so the same as normal LiDAR, light detection and radar, sort of off planes, and this can give us hopefully that flight height data for the birds that you can't get from digital aerial surveys. This is going to be the LiDAR in particular is going to be commissioned next month. And finally, this is something that we haven't commissioned yet, but it's pretty much complete, and we're hoping for a couple of funding sources in the next couple of months. So hopefully I can present this to you next year. But with floating offshore wind, there's a number of novel analogues and factors that will impact marine mammals differently as the fixed wind. But again, before we look into them, we really want to understand exactly what's out there. So we worked together with several partners to think of a subsea acoustic array, which combines several devices. As you can see here, this is the overall device. So we have an acoustic release device at the bottom. This is by RS Aqua. We also have a fish tag detector at the F-pod, which was mentioned earlier today, which detects high-frequency cetaceans, so porpoises and dolphins. And also on top of that, which is not shown here, but an LS1 loggerhead for low-frequency cetaceans, so your baleen whales, and the general soundscape of the environment. So hopefully we've partnered with Matthew Witt from the University of Exeter and some of his colleagues, of which I won't mention the statistical... Thank you. I won't mention the sort of statistical process that they will use because I can't explain them, but hopefully we will have a whole sort of pretty much heat map of exactly all sorts of cetaceans and general marine mammals will be in and around the area. But that's pretty all done for that. So I'll pass you back over to Alex.
Thanks, Harrison.
Thank you.
I'll do what I can in 4 minutes, whatever I've got left. Right, this is Poseidon. This is a project led by Natural England with support from CFAS and Bangor University with Sea-Watch Foundation. Just roll with the acronym, it kind of works. It's funded by the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme. So this is a Crown Estate fund of £50 million to support research into sustainable development of offshore wind whilst supporting biologically diverse seas. So we're very grateful for the group for funding this project. What we're trying to do in Poseidon is very similar to the work that Graham, Neil and Harrison have described. We're trying to collect new baseline data across the whole of the UK EEZ, but we're also collating data. So we've got something like 1 million kilometres of boat and aerial survey data that we've collated from across the UK, as well as a load of benthic data. We're going to pile all of that data into updated spatial models at UK scale, and we're going to use that to apply what we understand about sensitivity of these habitats and animals to offshore wind to create effectively a heat map which is integrated across seabirds, marine mammals, benthic, fish and landscape. Good luck. We're working, as I said, very closely with CFAS. We're making use of their One Benthic system. This is a big data approach to describing benthic habitats and animal communities. You can see the map on the left there. In yellow is the data that they've been able to bring in for Poseidon, with the blue data stuff they already had. So we're working from a base of already having a fair bit of data. This is the plan for 2023. This is all grab sampling stations. As you can see, it's very focused on the southwest, so we'll be getting a lot of new information this summer. The other part of the project is a highly mobile species. So this is predominantly focused on marine mammals and seabirds, 12 species of marine mammals, 26 species of seabirds. You can see the maps on the left show the really cool blue areas there where we've got least coverage at the moment. And the red area is where we're focusing our new data collection effort. So you can see it goes beyond the purple blob on the left map, which is the Celtic Sea Power area and the Crown Estate area. So we're filling in the gaps effectively, going right out to the edge of the EEZ to collect new information on seabirds and marine mammals out there, as well as in the North Sea and Scotland and Wales. That's a very, very quick canter through it all, but as you can hopefully tell from this, we're really working together to try and make this all piece together. We'll be producing maps and models from Poseidon that should be available in 2025, but the data will be available sooner. So as soon as it's processed and ready, it'll be on the Marine Data Exchange. Anyone can access and use it. We want to make data accessible and available. We're going to use it for risk mapping. That will feed into marine planning that we heard earlier, marine spatial prioritisation, all of these things that are going on. And we hope that all of this together will enable us to make really informed decisions, not just about offshore wind, but also potentially about other sectors that might be able to use the data that we're collecting. So yeah, big thank you to my co-presenters, and sure, have we got time for a question? Maybe one very quick one.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.